All these headlines and more by broadcaster Iain Dale, former Labour Home Secretary Jacqui Smith, and Dr Amir Khan is in the studio with us this morning. Good morning to all of you. Jacqui, I wonder, after everything we heard from Dominic Cummings on Wednesday, seeing Matt Hancock in the press briefing yesterday, managed to persuade you that what Dominic Cummings had said about Matt Hancock's performance was wrong, and in fact that Matt Hancock hadn't made any sort of significant lies, he hadn't misled Parliament and was doing a good job?
Well, excuse me. I think the problem here is what Matt Hancock said to his colleagues, because it's unarguably the case that the guidance that came from government during the first part of April 2020 didn't tell hospitals that they needed to test patients before they were discharged to care homes. And then on the 17th of April, it changed. And in the hospitals that I'm responsible for, from the following Monday, we then did test people before they went into care homes. Matt Hancock's right, but part of the reason I suspect why that wasn't happening was because there just wasn't enough testing capacity and there weren't enough beds, so you couldn't keep people in hospital before you discharged them. The problem is, if he was actually telling his colleagues that testing was happening when it clearly wasn't, then I can understand people's frustration. And that's the thing that we don't seem to be quite clear about, because to be fair to Matt Hancock, Dominic Cummings hasn't presented the actual evidence that that's what he was being told.
Iain, it sort of hinged on, seemingly yesterday, Matt Hancock kept coming back to the fact that he was trying to build up capacity for testing. His target was to get to this 100,000 tests a day, and that's what he was driving towards. And yet, when we've heard from Dr Amir this morning, and Jacqui's just pointed out, that it felt like there were people being released back into those care homes which was supposed to have a ring of protection around them, who weren't being tested at all. And as Paul Brand pointed out on ITN last night, to test those patients going back would only have taken about a 5% capacity. There was 25,000 people that were released back into their care homes and actually didn't need 100,000 tests to do that.
Well, I mean, let's get the facts right here. The 100,000 target was announced to be, I think, completed, was it by the 15th or was it the 30th of April? I think the period we're talking about here now was right when lockdown started and the couple of weeks after that. Yeah. And bear in mind also, this was happening in Wales and Scotland too, which Matt Hancock has no say over. And if you look at the figures, I think I'm right in saying that in Scotland, the death rate in care homes was higher proportionally than in the rest of the United Kingdom. That's not to say, look, I don't know, and none of us know what Matt Hancock said to his colleagues. Dominic Cummings has made a very serious allegation and accused him of lying. And one of the things that I thought was slightly odd, although we have to, Dominic Cummings was there. He clearly knows a lot of what went on, and that's why his evidence was so fascinating. But he did seem to pour all his vitriol over Matt Hancock rather than anybody else. Michael Gove, his old boss when he was Education Secretary, got no mention. Yet Michael Gove is Cabinet Office Minister, responsible for coordinating the entire response to COVID. He praised Rishi Sunak to the skies for everything, in many ways quite rightly, because I think he did do a lot of really good things at the beginning. But why this vitriol over Matt Hancock? There seems to be some maybe personal grudge there that we don't know about. And if he's got evidence of Matt Hancock's wrongdoing, then he ought to present it. But it was a lot of speculation that we heard in the evidence session.
And he has said, I think, I'm not sure that anything has appeared yet, that he is going to release the emails and texts which imply that there might be evidence of it. But just to come back to Jacqui, you're right, both of you have said that the timing is very interesting of who knew what when, now that we know that people weren't tested before they were released. There seems to be this sort of summons of Matt Hancock in May to sort of explain possible care homes negligence. Do we understand that, as late as May last year, he and the men were already suspicious of being misled? That they'd called him in to clarify it? Because I think that's then quite interesting, because we haven't heard any clarification or admissions from anybody, either the Prime Minister or Matt Hancock, since that date, have we? It seems very unclear who said what to whom.
Well, it's completely unclear who said what to whom, and that's the basis of Dominic Cummings' charge. And What is completely clear is that people weren't being tested before they went into care homes at the beginning of the pandemic. As I say, in our case, up until the 20th of April, on the instructions of the centre of the NHS, which was Matt Hancock's responsibility. And I don't know what he said to other people in government. You know, what I do know, and Iain and I talked about this on the podcast at the time, is there was an awful lot of briefing going on about Matt Hancock. It does appear that he certainly felt like he was being made the scapegoat for things that were going wrong, and presumably that was briefing that was coming from Dominic Cummings. So I'm not sure that one of the things that Dominic Cummings isn't doing, bizarrely, is almost putting a protective ring, to coin a phrase, around the Prime Minister, despite the fact, claiming that he didn't know, despite the fact that he also this week said the Prime Minister wasn't a fit person to hold that role. So it's all, I have to say, extremely depressing, I think, if you're somebody who is either struggling to get through the pandemic or lost somebody.
Well, the front page of the Mirror has, you know, the faces of people who died in that first time period through, you know, contracting COVID in a care home, and they were told that they were safe, and they certainly weren't. Jacqui, a lot of this seems to come down to, and Ben and I have said it many times, haven't we, to each other and on the programme, why do people not admit their mistakes? Why do governments not say, look, we're trying to get everything right, we got this wrong? You've been in a position of having to come out and answer questions. Is it because you fear you'll suddenly be the scapegoat and the whole of the rest of the government will pile in on you, and so it's a kind of personal fear? Or is it because it's just very complicated what reaction that will then cause? Give us some insight into that.
Well, if I think I'm being completely honest, I suspect it's because if you were to admit the mistakes, let's say on an interview with you guys, I suspect the first thing you would then say is you should resign, shouldn't you? Right? So there wouldn't be a sort of understanding of why it was that you ended up in that position, which is why I think it's absolutely crucial that sooner rather than later the inquiry gets underway. It's now proposed that it isn't going to be until next April, but there needs to be a calm review of what did and didn't happen, what people did and didn't know, what could possibly have been foreseen and wasn't, and what couldn't, because of course we've got to understand that some of these decisions were being made at a time when nobody quite understood how the pandemic was going to unravel. But that's why you need that inquiry. You need to start learning the lessons now. Or at least setting it up now, so that you can have that calm way that people can properly reflect on what went wrong and what went right and who was responsible.
Otherwise, it's just held by people like Dominic Cummings, isn't it?
Go on, Iain.
That's the thing. Sorry.
I was just going to say, we should also acknowledge that Jacqui never made a single mistake when she was Home Secretary, which is why she never had to do anything like this.
I think
just to balance this out a bit, just remember at the time that as well as the crisis in the care homes, there was the PPE crisis, there was the ventilator crisis. And on ventilators, Matt Hancock oversaw, I thought, quite a success, and also the setting up of the Nightingale hospitals, which came under his remit too. I mean, I'm not sitting here saying Matt Hancock didn't do anything wrong, because I think when it all comes out in the wash, he will probably admit, look, we did get some things wrong. But it is now the time to really go into that. Is now the time really to start the inquiry now? I'm not sure it is.
Iain, your point is something that everyone has been grappling with, is the credibility of Dominic Cummings. What does Dominic Cummings have to prove now? And if all this speculation without any proof that we haven't seen just yet, can we trust him as a witness to all of this? Dr. Amir is here with us, and I wonder, Amir, how it felt for you, having worked in those care homes, having released some of your patients into them and having to look after them, to hear Dominic Cummings say some of the things that you had experienced firsthand.
Yeah, I think we've all suspected it. We've all kind of known that mistakes were made, and it was hard to watch. It wasn't surprising, if I'm being honest, but it was difficult to hear it outright. But it was even more difficult to watch Matt Hancock not admit his mistakes. And that's as an NHS worker who's taking care of people in care homes. But I can imagine it's much, much worse for people who have lost loved ones.
So Nicola Sturgeon, for instance, has admitted that with care homes errors were made.
Yeah.
What does that do for you as an NHS worker to see someone admit it and then someone not admit it?
Well, you see integrity in Nicola Sturgeon a lot more than I would with Matt Hancock, because she's admitted those mistakes and she's learned from them, because Scotland have since a certain point they have locked down a bit longer. Their rules have been slightly different where they could. So yeah, I do see Nicola Sturgeon in a different way for admitting those mistakes. It's not easy to admit mistakes, but it does do something for you as an NHS worker, I think, because we've had to live through it. And, you know, Iain mentioned PPE crisis. That's another huge issue that is yet to be dealt with. And we question whether now is the right time for a public inquiry. I do think it is. I think it is now. People are still hurting. People are still upset. And to hear that the government is too busy to do
Even if it means distracting some of these people for tackling the problems, because that's the argument that's made, isn't it?
Yeah.
We can't be knee-deep with lawyers in a public inquiry right now when we're trying to solve a pandemic.
But I understand that part of the argument. But there are, you know, there are still people working behind the scenes on all of this. If they're saying distracting from perhaps the vaccination programme, it's us in the NHS who are delivering that vaccination programme. Us in primary care have delivered 75% of the vaccines. So it's those people like Matt Hancock who need to come forward in this public inquiry.
Interestingly, of course, I think the government did a review into the PPE situation, and they found that there wasn't any lacking PPE around the country themselves. Matt Hancock defended it, kept saying that, even though we had heard firsthand and we'd seen firsthand that wasn't necessarily the case, sort of in the care homes, for example. Can we just touch, before we let you go, Iain and Jacqui, on the Indian variant? Because, of course, what we're starting to see is this resurgence in cases, as Amir's been pointing out. They've doubled in the week. You know, hospital admissions haven't gone up yet, but there is a lag, so it's 2 weeks to go. What are your thoughts, Iain, with regards to sort of what Boris Johnson's reaction will be to this and the 21st of June? Is he going to be even more cautious now, bearing in mind what we've been through already, and actually pushing that date further back rather than allow things to open up with the Indian variant sort of looming large?
Well, he's always said we've got to rely on the data and not be obsessed by dates. And at the moment, we don't have the data. You just said that the number of cases has doubled in a week, which in many ways is extremely worrying. But it is actually, I think it's 6,000 cases. Now, if you think that all this surge testing is taking place in places like Bolton, Blackburn, Leicester, I think there's 8 different areas, well, that you will get a higher rate of cases if you do this surge testing around those communities. I think what the government don't know yet is how widespread it is all over the country. Now, they know that it is present in over half of local authority areas. So what they'll be looking at between now, from now on, is how much it spreads in those areas, as well as the places where there's a lot of it about at the moment. I'm afraid, if I was betting on this at the moment, I would say it looks as if there may well be a delay to the June 21st date. Now, that would be a terrible thing in many ways, because you have to have public consent to have these measures be extended. And I think there'll be a lot of very, very unhappy people. I had a lady phone into my show last night saying, look, I'm getting married. I've invited 70 people. Am I really going to have to postpone it for the 3rd time?
I mean, Iain, the thing is, though, it's that kind of pressure, of course, which the briefings are going on that made Boris Johnson delay the lockdown first of all. You know, all those kind of societal pressures where people need to keep it open, and economic too.
Well, I think if you're Prime Minister, the last thing you want to do is to lock down an economy. And I can completely understand why Boris Johnson was reluctant to do that at first, because a lot of the scientists were not recommending a lockdown because they didn't think the public would accept a lengthy lockdown.
So towards that has changed, though, Iain? Do you think his attitude towards that has changed because of the second wave, particularly in the delay in locking down on the second wave?
I think at the moment he won't know what to do. And I think we all sometimes have to put ourselves in his place, because, again, he will want to go ahead with that June the 21st date, make no mistake. But if he's getting a torrent of data over the next week or 10 days that demonstrate that this is threatening to get out of control, there is only one decision to make, however unpopular it is. And we know that Boris Johnson likes to be popular. He does sometimes, I think, put off unpopular decisions. Well, this one, I think he's had enough experience of this to know that he's just got to do the right thing.
And Jacqui, if you were a betting woman, and I'm not saying you are, would you suggest, as Iain did, that actually that date could well get delayed?
I think I agreed with almost everything that Iain said. I think it's possible the date gets delayed. I think the important thing that the government should and will be looking at is not just the level of infection, but the extent to which that increases the number of people in hospital. So far, that doesn't seem to have had the big impact that you might expect from an increase in infections. But I just hope, if we're to believe Dominic Cummings, I just hope this time round the Prime Minister isn't on holiday, isn't worrying about his dog, is attending the meetings and is concentrating on the best interests of the country rather than briefing journalists about what's going on inside Downing Street.
Well,
just one other thing, if I can, Ben. What they should be doing now is making sure that everyone in those 8 areas has their second vaccination as quickly as possible, because it's now been shown that the vaccines are only 33% effective against the Indian variant if you've only had 1 dose. So that's what needs to be ramped up now, even if it means taking vaccines from other areas of the country, because that would be a wise investment in the long term.
Yeah, I think we can all agree with that. It's good to see you both. Jacqui, it's nice to see you out of the kitchen and seeing the garden as well. You can tell spring has sprung, or the summer's here.
Turned round, that's all. I'm still in the same place.
Ah, it's nice to get another view.
We haven't seen no jugs today.
No jugs, but we have got the garden. I'll stop.
You've got my book.
You had to go there, didn't you, Jacqui? See, I behaved. I stopped myself.
and that takes some doing, doesn't it? It really does.
Thank you, Iain.
Thank you,
Jacqui.
guys, and thank you, Dr. Amir Khan, too. Thank